William and Mary acknowledges the indigenous peoples who are the original inhabitants of the lands our campus is on today. The Cherenhaka Nottoway, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Mattaponi, Monacan, Nansemond, Nottoway, Pamunkey, Patawomic, Upper Mattaponi, and Rappahannock tribes, and pay our respect to their tribal members, past and present. Now the introduction of our speaker. Jessica Nabongo is a writer, photographer, entrepreneur, travel expert, influencer, and public speaker. In October 29, she completed her journey as the first Black woman on record to travel to all 195 UN-recognized countries of the world. That was 2019. At her core, she is a dreamer looking to craft a life and career that connects her passions and talents. She wants to use her story to educate and inspire others to travel and experience the world around them. A first-generation American, Nabongo was born and raised in Detroit by Ugandan parents. She attended St. John's University in New York, where she earned a degree in English literature, later completing a graduate degree in development studies at the London School of Economics. She uses her blog, The Catch Me If You Can, to share her travel adventures and build a global community. She is also the founder of the lifestyle brand, The Catch. In the inspiring travel log, The Catch Me If You Can, One Woman's Journey to Every Country in the World, Nabongo describes her journey around the world, highlighting 100 countries with fascinating stories of adventure, culture, travel musts, and human connections. In her own words, the goal is to expand people's understanding of the globe and make it more accessible to everyone. Her book is a collection of countries that make her heart smile. She hopes the stories make you laugh, cry, and ultimately think differently about the world in which we live. Jessica is committed to increasing cultural awareness and encourages people to think positively about other countries and the world at large, so that we do not miss out on opportunities to have amazing experiences with our neighbors. This is the annual McSwain-Walker Lecture, which brings renowned scholars, artists, analysts, and other notable public figures to William and Mary to speak on topics related to how other countries and cultures perceive us in the United States and how we in the United States interact with them. Previous speakers include Viet Thanh Nguyen, Haben Gurma, Swedish Ambassador Karen Olofsdotter, Orlando Rojas, Guillermo Gomez Peña, and Harriet Fulbright. Now we are able to add Jessica Nabongo to this distinguished list. After the lecture, her books will be out in the entryway for sale if anyone would like to buy one. Right now, however, I would very much like to ask you to join me in welcoming Jessica Nabongo.
Hello, everyone. So this is my first time in Williamsburg. So it's been really enjoyable just getting a chance to see a little bit of the city, learn about the history. This morning I got to learn about the Bray School, which is so exciting, and I'm hoping once it's finally done and open to come back. And I have to say thank you so much to Kate, who's been an amazing guide while I've been here, but who's been working tirelessly for I don't even know how many months at this point, maybe like 9 months to get me here. So thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So I'm going to start out saying a few things, but I really hope that within like 25, 30 minutes, stop me if I'm talking too much, we can really turn it into a conversation, because I think there's just so much more to be learned when we're in conversation versus me just talking at you. So thank you all for being here. I will say it's skewed a little bit towards students, but I hope even as adults we can find something here as well. So yes, today we're going to be talking about intentional travel and how education, empathy, and confidence can help you create the life that you want to live. So who am I and how did I get here? We heard a little bit through my bio, but what I want to do is just basically take you through my entire life. It won't take that long, and I promise it's entertaining. So, dun, dun, dun. So the most important thing to see here is that life is not linear, right? It's not a straight line. This thing is a wild roller coaster, and I'm so grateful for the ups, but also for the downs because they taught me so much. So starting in 1984, here is baby Jessica. Born in Detroit, Michigan, as mentioned, my parents are from Uganda. They permanently settled in the U.S. in 1969. Fun fact, my dad came to the U.S. in the 50s on a scholarship, so it was pre-independence of Uganda, and he came on the same scholarship program as Barack Obama Sr., which is a very cool fun fact. So he went to school in Western Michigan, which is how we landed in Detroit. So this is me at my high school prom. And so what happened between 1984 and 2002? My parents introduced me to travel. They love to travel. Whenever I say this, people are like, are they military? Did they work for the UN? No, they just really like to travel. My mother retired as a registered nurse, and my father retired as an analytical chemist. And so growing up from the age of 4, my siblings and I got to travel internationally with my parents. Sometimes they left us at home and went with their friends, and sometimes they were really generous and they took us with them. So by the time I graduated from high school, I'd been to, I think, 7 or 8 countries and 1 territory. So this was me leaving Detroit, and I went off to New York City. So I studied at St. John's University. I was an English literature major, and I had a double minor in advertising communications and Africana studies. The Africana Studies minor, yes. I actually developed in partnership with one of my professors. So while I was there, it became a minor, and then of course I minored in my minor. And while there, I did internships at Time Inc. and Pfizer. And for some of the young people, I don't know, does anybody recognize who's sitting next to me? J. Cole. So Jermaine, we went to college together, and he was one of my closest friends. So this picture is actually, this is the executive board of like the Black Student Union, which we called Haraya. And then I graduated, I finished school in December 2005, and then I walked in May with my friends. Oh, corporate Jessica. So I graduated in 2005, and I had lunch with some students earlier today, and I was telling them, so I had a full-time offer, and I was meant to start work at the beginning of January, and I actually decided not to, because I said, when will I ever have a month off in my life again? Because, I was like, oh my God, I'm graduating college, I'm going into the workforce, I'll be there for like 50 years. I didn't know what was gonna happen. So I took a month off, and I started in February. And so this is corporate Jessica. I used to work for a pharmaceutical company, and Pfizer, the world's #1 pharmaceutical company at the time. I have no idea what they're doing now. And it's so funny because I graduated early. So I'm 21 in this picture, and I went into these offices, and everyone thought I was in my 30s, which feels like it might have been offensive. But I like to think it was because I'm very mature. But yeah, it's so crazy that this was my life. And so what happened next is I worked there 2 years full time. I was promoted 3 times in the 2 years, but I was really, really unhappy and had no idea what I wanted to do. But what I will say, and so much credit goes to my parents, is they always let me quit. So starting at the age of 3, I played the piano, I did ballet, I did tap, I played the clarinet, percussion, I played softball, tennis, basketball, I took engineering classes, swimming classes, modeling, acting. I did so many things, and when I didn't feel like doing it anymore, they let me quit. And I say that because that has had so much influence on how I've lived my life. So even though I was doing really well at my job and I was getting promoted, I was really unfulfilled. And I never felt bad for quitting, right? I never felt bad for quitting something that I didn't want to do. So in 2007, it was bonus day. I remember it like it was yesterday. And my bonus was so sad. It was like 3 digits. Like, why would you even send this to my bank account? And I was so angry because, I was raised to believe the world is a meritocracy. I graduated on the dean's list from college. I graduated magna cum laude, all that. But my hard work in that role wasn't being acknowledged because of external factors, right? Like the market was changing, generic drugs, et cetera. And I remember that day, something in me broke. And I was like, okay. I had a friend living in Japan who was teaching English. And I was like, I'm going to go teach English in Japan. And so I went home, I Googled it, I applied, and I got accepted into this program. And the crazy thing about this is 2008, as some of us will remember, there was an economic downturn in the United States. Pfizer laid off 20,000 people, and I did not get laid off. And I was very sad. So when my boss called me, and because they did this thing where everybody had to sit at home, and they called us to tell us if we got laid off. And my boss called me and said, you didn't get laid off. And I was like, okay. He was like, oh, no, you didn't hear me. You didn't get laid off. I'm like, oh. And he had been laid off, which was like torture for him to have to do this. And I was like, well, can I trade with someone? And they were like, no. And so at this point, you have to understand, I'm 23. I'm making good money. I have a company car. They're paying for my cell phone, my internet, like all of these perks. And I was just like, I don't want this anymore. So I ended up leaving. I submitted my resignation, and my manager gave it back to me. And basically, he was like, little girl, you don't know what you're doing. And made me call my regional vice president. I was like, I'm leaving, guys. It's okay. If anything goes wrong, I'll be back. And so I shaved my hair, and I moved to Japan. And I taught all these cute little babies how to speak English. So I was living in Japan for 1 year, and it was the first time that I ever lived abroad. So Japan was the 10th country I'd visited. I'd never been to Asia. I'd been to a couple European countries, and of course, Uganda in the Caribbean. But I remember landing there. And when you go to Europe, at least you can recognize words. You may not be able to pronounce it, but you see letters that resonate, right? In Japan, it is not so. And I remember even getting on the plane, no one looked like me. And I'm like, oh my God, what did I do? I've already I quit my job, I moved out of my condo, and now I'm 14-hour flight from home, 12-hour time difference. What is happening? And you have to also remember, this is 2008. This came out in September 2007. There was no such thing as apps. Instagram did not exist. WhatsApp did not exist. So Skype was out, but people still had, some of you don't even know what we went through. Who remembers when you used to put the camera on your computer, right? Like my mom got all this. I mean, it was a different world. You guys will never understand what we went through. But it was a very different world. So now when people go abroad, study abroad, there's a lot of people in here I know who've studied abroad, you can still be very connected. That was not the situation when I lived in Japan. But it was an amazing year, and it stretched me in ways that I never could have imagined. And I think it also just gave me a confidence to be in the world by myself, right? Because I'm like, if I can take the train in Japan to Osaka and survive and get home safely, I'm like, I can go anywhere. So that was my year in Japan. And while living there, it was my first time living abroad, I decided, you know what, I don't want to go back to the United States. So, and I also don't love to work. So what did I do? I applied for grad school. And I had a friend of mine who we interned at Pfizer together, and he was in grad school at the London School of Economics. And I was like, that's a good school. Only school I applied to. And so I went there in the fall. So in the meantime, in between time, I started my blog, The Catch Me If You Can. And so this blog, it goes back to 2009, because when I was living in Japan, I started a blog just for my family and my friends, and then strangers started reading it, and I was like, this is really weird. And so then when I left Japan, I was traveling for 9 months before I moved to London, and I started this blog because my friends would always call me Carmen Sandiego, or they would text me and they're like, where, I got a text from a friend last week and she's like, where in the world is Jessica Nabongo? And I'm like, I'm in Panama. So it still continues till today. So again, I think people tend to compress people's timelines, but 2009 was a very long time ago, and this is what I was doing. Then 2009 to 2010 saw me living in London. I did my master's at the London School of Economics with studied development, which is international development in the US. And I focused on agriculture. So foreign direct investment in agriculture in Africa was what my dissertation was on. And it was an amazing experience because LSE actually represents more nations than the UN, because like a lot of the dependent territories. And, you know, just to be at such a world-class institution in London, you know, I met someone from Moldova. I was like, where's Moldova? It's in Eastern Europe, and one of my least favorite countries, but she's so sweet. But it was just such an incredible experience to be in a place with people from all across the globe. You know, I think like I had Thai classmates and Chinese classmates, and truly it was such a world-class experience, but my worldview expanded greatly because I'm hearing from other people what their experiences were, and also getting to share some of mine. And obviously, because I was in London, I took advantage of things like 19-pound flights on Ryanair, which I would not fly today to save my life, but highly recommend it for college kids going to Europe in the summer. Super cheap airline, very bare bones. But it really just gave me the opportunity to explore more of the world and more of Europe specifically. So then in 2010, when I graduated, I could not find a job despite my resume. And I was dating an Italian guy at the time. And he got an internship in rural Benin. And I was like, I have nothing to do. I'll go with you. And so I did. And which is so funny because some people ask me about that. And I'm like, I didn't even give it a second thought. I was like, I have nothing to do. You're my boyfriend. I'm going to go with you, if that's okay by you. And so we were in Benin together for 6 months. We lived in a convent, so we told them we were married. In hindsight, was probably wrong on some level. But it was a really interesting experience. It was very uncomfortable. You know, we didn't have hot water. I was grateful we had running water. But it was really tough. I think as someone who studied development and continued to work in the industry for 5 years, it's very different when you're living in the rural part of one of the poorest countries in the world, right? We lived 250 kilometers north of Cotonou, which is the economic capital, and it was rough. It was really rough. I struggled. I did improve my French because there was not much to do there. And it was just an amazing opportunity to really see how people live. You know, so much of our time is spent in classrooms and in very impractical settings. So to have the opportunity to be in that very practical setting was eye-opening and heartbreaking. Okay. Then 2011, I moved to Rome. My Italian boyfriend decided to move to rural Kenya, and I said, I'm taking my talents back to Europe. You can have that. And we broke up shortly thereafter. And I ended up staying in Rome for about 1.5 years. And it was interesting. You know, people hear that I worked at the UN, and they're like, oh, my God, that's so amazing. I want to work for the UN, but it is an international government institution. So if you know anything about the government, it is inefficient. So on an international level, with all of these cultural differences, it's even more inefficient. So it was, again, another really interesting opportunity coming from university, from LSE, and going into the practical places where they should be doing the work. It was tough. It was interesting. And just to be So I worked at the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, which is based in Rome. And in Rome, we have what we call the three Rome-based agencies, which are all focused on food. So the Food and Agriculture Organization, WFP, the World Food Program. So whenever you see food being dropped in countries, that's WFP. And the International Fund for Agricultural Development, which is like the World Bank in the agriculture sector. And so it was incredible, again, just to meet people from all over the world, being able to work in French and use my French, but just learning about a lot of the bottlenecks in international development. So I was there for about a year and a half. In December 2012, I decided I wanted to quit. And my team bought me 3 books. 1, How to Stay Sane. I hated my boss. 2, How to Find Fulfilling Work. And 3, The Keys for Success and Happiness. And it was that 3rd book that really changed my life. And so I remember December 23rd, I was in the airport in Rome, and my flight to Paris was canceled. I was flying Rome, Paris, Detroit. My flight was canceled, and I was like, get me home. I'm not spending Christmas in an airport. So they ended up putting me through Amsterdam so I could get home for Christmas. And while in line in the airport, I'm texting my friend who lived in Buenos Aires working for Interpol, and he was like, just buy the ticket. I was like, for how long? He's like, whatever. So I booked a ticket to Buenos Aires for 6 weeks. I didn't know what I was doing. I was kind of scared. I was like, okay, I'm doing it. I'm just going to go, whatever. And so I get home, and then early January, I flew to Buenos Aires, and I spent 6 weeks traveling to like Uruguay, traveling all around Argentina, and then traveling to Brazil. And because I didn't realize that Americans needed a visa for Brazil, there were no visa appointments in Buenos Aires. And because it was Carnival, which I also did not realize because I was a poor planner. And so I ended up taking a 17-hour bus to Iguazu, which is the famous waterfalls, which is on the border of Argentina and Brazil. The nice thing is you can get a visa overnight because people often want to see the waterfall from both sides. But I had to get to Rio, and I had no money. So I took a 28-hour bus from Iguazu to Rio, which I survived. And the crazy thing is I had a flight from Rio to Iguazu because I was going to do it on the back end, but again, no money. So I flew back to Iguazu and took a 17-hour bus back to Buenos Aires. Times are different now, but that's how I had to travel back then. And just that time that I spent in South America, it was just so incredible. Again, like staying in hostels and meeting people from all over the world, Australians who are like, oh, I'm traveling, but I have to go for a year because Australia is so far away. Just meeting people who were living very free lives and lives that I think were full of possibility. And that's really what gave me the confidence and sort of bolstered me to think differently about what was possible in terms of my life and ultimately my career. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, so when I left Rome, they did not want me to leave, but I was like, well, I don't want to stay in Rome. So I actually became a digital nomad, which the term did not exist at the time, because this is January 2013. And so they let me work remotely, and I got to go to Iceland, Brazil, hang out with my friends, and it was just an amazing time. And then I went back to Rome because they gave me an offer I could not refuse. So I went back to Rome for a few months. I think for like 9 months, more or less. And then I left to celebrate my 30th birthday. And I told my boss I was leaving for 2 months. He asked me to come back in 2 weeks. And then I quit. I was like, no, I need 2 months to celebrate my 30th. And so literally I just traveled for 30 days celebrating my 30th birthday. And then I just decided at that point, I'd been living abroad for 7 years, and I was having FOMO, fear of missing out. I wanted to go back to the US because I'd missed like friends' birthdays and births and deaths and weddings. And I really started to just feel like I wasn't connected to my friends and family anymore. So I decided to come back to the United States in the fall of 2014. So I moved to Rome. This is one of my best friends, Anthony. We were roommates. He was working at NASA, and I was working at a consulting firm, and USAID was my client. And so again, 7 years abroad, the return hit me like a ton of bricks. Reverse culture shock is very real because when you're born in a country, you don't realize what is happening to you, right? Because everything is normal. But when you go abroad, in particular as a Black woman, what I hadn't realized was the weight of racism living in America. I never realized it, right? Because, like, that was just life. But going abroad and being abroad for so long and coming back into the US, it was like, whoa, that every day almost I'm being made aware of my race, right? That was something I wasn't experiencing very often at all. Certainly not on a daily basis. Of course, sometimes things happen, but just not on the same level as in the US. That was a struggle for me because that summer was when Mike Brown was killed. And I remember I went to Copenhagen for Thanksgiving that year, and the night before I left was when they did when the attorney general or whatever came on and told us that they weren't going to bring charges against the police that killed him. And I remember being in Amsterdam. I transited through Amsterdam, and I remember going into the lounge, and Ferguson was on fire, and there were newspapers in like 7 different languages with pictures of Ferguson on the cover. And this is in the airport in Amsterdam. And it just, for me, obviously was a reflection of what was going on in the US. And that was 2014, and now, Jesus Christ, almost 10 years later, it's gotten so much worse. And for me, that time in DC, it was also my first time working in an American office space. Cubicles are not fun. I don't know how many of you work in them, but not nice. And I only lasted 1 year. I was just like, I deserve better. Like, I literally could not do it. It was like stay and work and, have something do something bad to myself, or quit and figure it out. And so I quit and I figured it out. So in 2015, freedom, but also struggle and questioning, because I started a travel agency. Of course, in the beginning, it wasn't doing that great. But I was just like, I'm just going to figure it out. I had a bit of savings. I had friends with couches in different cities, so I was living on them. My mother still lives in my childhood home. She very graciously has me over sometimes. And so that was what life was for several years before I found success. This is me in Uganda washing my own clothes, because the house we were staying at, we didn't have anybody there. And then this was, oh, that's so crazy. Sorry, someone made my deck. This was 2015. So I've been at this life for a very long time, because that's a lot of time in the air. And so that's what I did. I was building my travel agency, and I was just figuring it out, which is okay. And I think, again, like, showing the direction of my life, it wasn't always up. A lot of people will look at my life now and they're like, oh my God, you're so successful, da, da, da. But it's like, what about the backstory? How did I get to this point? And this is how I got here. And then in 2017, I was in Bali on my Eat, Pray, Love. And I was there for like 3 weeks, and a couple friends came down during the time. And one of my friends, we were having dinner, and I said to her, I want Oprah to interview me. She's like, why would Oprah interview you? I was like, I don't know. I'll figure something out. And so at the time, I heard of an American woman who got the Guinness record for visiting every country in the world the fastest. And I always had a goal in my early 20s of visiting every country in the world, but I didn't know it was like a thing. It was just like, on my blog every year, I would say, I went to 12 countries, I went to 15. And I was always filling in a map. And so after that, I found out there was this whole community of weirdos like me that are country counters. And I also found out at that time, less than 150 people in the world had been to every country. And one Black person, that was Slawek Maturi, who's half Kenyan, half Polish, who I met last year, and he's been to every country in the world twice and almost 3 times, which I will never do. It's crazy. So 2017, Indonesia was country number 60. And then I was like, okay, I want to be the first Black woman to go to every country in the world. And then I did it. So I visited 135 new countries in 2.5 years, which is not even close to the Guinness record. So I don't even I can't even process how they do it in 18 months. And so, yeah, that's what I did. And so the first picture there, that's me in Afghanistan, Cuba, Canada, Banff, one of the most beautiful places in the entire world. And then this is me, my mom, and my sisters in Seychelles, which was my final country. 55 of my close friends and family came. They call it my wedding. And then this was me in Bolivia. And so, yeah, I finished visiting every country in the world October 6, 2019, which is my father's birthday. So my dad passed in 2003. And for me, it was a way to sort of bring him into the journey. And then obviously from there, things got really crazy. You know, I was already working in media a bit as a travel expert, but as word got out that I was doing this thing and I did it, it came with a lot of media attention. And so then, oh, this is me and Michael Strahan. And on Good Morning America. So during the pandemic, the Washington Post reached out for comments around revenge travel. This was August 2020 when we thought the world was going to open back up way sooner than it did. And this idea that people would want to travel like crazy because we'd been locked up. That actually didn't even end up happening until last summer. So if anybody traveled last summer to Europe, which I did not, you would have seen all of the people, and you probably saw on the news all the luggage issues because people were outside. And so my editor at National Geographic read that article, Googled me, and filled in the contact us form on my website. And she asked, do you want to write a book for National Geographic? And I had already talked to a lot of major publishers, and the difference here was that they had an idea of the book they wanted me to write. She wanted to help me write a book that I wanted to write. And so I remember our first call, I was in Delaware because I did this crazy 12,000-mile road trip around the U.S. during the pandemic. And we decided to do a book together. And when we were talking about the title, she said, The Catch Me If You Can. I was like, my blog. And I was like, but there's another book by that name. Is this allowed? Yes, you cannot trademark the name of books. Who knew? So this is my baby. She is now a little more than, 8 months old? And, you know, it was great. Like, I got to go on Good Morning America, The Today Show, The Breakfast Club, TMZ, so many places to talk about this book. And it's just been a really beautiful and incredible experience. The book also has over 300 images, most of which I took. The ones that I'm not in, I took. So it was just an incredible experience to be able to distill everything that I learned into a book. And then last week, I interviewed the Vice President, Kamala Harris. Still not really sure how that happened, but I was invited to the state dinner in Ghana. So Kamala Harris went on her first official visit to the African continent, I think 2 weeks ago now, and I was invited to the state dinner, and while I was there, they asked me if I wouldn't mind interviewing her the next week. And the first date they offered, I said, I can't do it. I have plans. And then they offered a second date a few days later, and I was like, cool, I can make that work. So this was literally last Wednesday at the National African American Museum of History and Culture up in DC. So it was a really incredible experience. So that brings us to today. And so that is who I am, how I got here. And so I want to talk a little bit about like what I've learned along the way. So the value of education, empathy, and confidence. First things first is education comes in many forms, both inside and outside of the classroom. And I think, you know, obviously practical education is great. I love education. I'm a super nerd. I would like to get 5 more master's degrees if I had the time. But I think there's such a beautiful opportunity to learn outside of the classroom. Travel, obviously, is a great way. But I think the other thing is just realizing that all of us are going to have different experiences. Every single person sitting here right now is experiencing this talk in a different way. And there's so much wisdom in that. And so for me, I never discount anyone. I think there's always opportunities to learn from anyone on the street. Like I remember when I moved to DC, that was where I moved to when I moved back in the US. I did not know DC had such a homelessness issue. It was really mind-blowing because I'm like, but this is the capital of America. What is happening? And I remember when I first moved there, I was walking down the street and there was this homeless woman sitting on the street and she's like, oh, hey, you're a Siberian princess. And I was like, Siberian? Okay. Sure. I said, sure, thank you. And she was like, we just had a little chat. And my friend is like, come on, Jessica, get in the car. I'm like, okay, I have to go now. And she's like, give me a hug. I'm like, okay. And my friend's like, Jessica. And I'm like, what am I going to do? Like, be like, ew, don't touch me. That feels very rude. So I gave her a hug, and I get in the car. She didn't ask me for anything. And we get in the car. My friend is like, you're nuts. I'm like, she's a person. And she knocks on the window. My friend says, see? And she knocked on the window, and she was going like this. She was motioning for me to put on my seatbelt. And then I said, see? Because, we discount and we discard people. And we, in particular, homeless people, we have all types of assumptions about them. But they're still human, and they still want to be seen. They still want to have that human connection. And so it didn't cost me anything to have, that 2-3 minute interaction with her. And she didn't want anything from me. She just wanted a little bit of human interaction. And so when you think positively and you're just open, you can learn so much from people in the world. Because from her, it's like that was a lesson in kindness, right? The magic of travel. So my first solo experience was in 2007. I went to London, Paris, and Madrid. It was the first time I traveled across the Atlantic without my family. And I was so nervous. I was like, what am I going to do on a plane for 8 hours by myself? But I did it. I went. And I landed in London, and it was great. My cousin picked me up from the airport, and the next day I went to Paris. So I was meeting my friend in Paris, and again, this was not a thing. And so he didn't show up in the airport. So I had to pay. Does anybody remember in airports they used to have computers, and you could put your credit card in, and you could use the internet? Okay, some people remember. So I'm in Paris. I'm like putting in my credit card to use this computer to send an email. So I book a hotel. I send an email to my friend. I'm like, okay, boom, meet me here. And I get on the train, because this is when the euro was like 1.85 to the dollar. So taxis, no. So I take the train into the city. And my French was pretty good, probably had a terrible accent, but I knew I was stringing together the sentences well. But Parisians are not the most, See, I see people who know. If you've been to Paris, you know. Parisians are not nice. And so it was a struggle. And I remember finally getting out of the train, and I was just crying. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to just take a taxi, right, to get to my hotel. The taxi ride is 20 minutes. Turns out it should have been a 5-minute drive, which is what I found out from the hotel, whatever. And so it just sucked really badly. And honestly, it was so hard. And I was crying in the streets of Paris, but I survived. And honestly, I was 23, and after that, I was like, oh, I can do anything. I am invincible. If I survive this horrible moment, I was like, I'm fine. And so it really, thank God my parents had introduced me to different parts of the world prior to that. But really, for me, the magic of travel is that it builds your confidence, because you're really able to show up in a new environment and like take control. And, if you're not there with someone else who's guiding you, it's all on you. And so being able to survive that and thrive and enjoy Paris for what it was really helped me at a very young age to understand the magic of travel. The power of the pivot. So I think this has really been my journey. So you saw how many jobs I quit and how many different sort of careers that I've had. And for me, the power of the pivot is what has brought me to this place right now. Even now, a lot of people will say, well, what do you do? I'm like, anything that people will pay me for. I recently became an artist. So my art is right now showing in Christie's in London. It's the first time I've shown my art in a gallery, and it's at Christie's in London, because I just feel like I can do anything I want to do, and I think a big thing for me is like, I don't have to be boxed in. I don't have to be boxed into the idea of I'm a writer, or I'm a photographer, or I'm a public speaker. I feel like I can do anything I want to do. I'll figure it out, YouTube University. And then, I can do anything I want. And again, I think this comes back to the idea of being able to quit, which thanks, Mom and Dad. The importance of reading. I cannot emphasize this enough. Obviously, most people will never visit every country in the world, but I am someone who grew up in a home full of books, and it was reading that even gave me any sort of idea about the world. Besides, like, my parents getting me out there, I am an avid reader. I think I'm on my 10th book for this year already, but I can't emphasize it enough. Read, 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 read. Not short articles, but like actual books. Audible is amazing. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, but I just feel like you have to just keep reading, and you have to be a lifelong learner, because for me, my journey has been driven by my curiosity. You know, and people are like, why'd you go to every country in the world? Because I wanted to know what people live like everywhere. I'm just a very curious person. And so much of that was honed through reading hundreds of books. So I have a question as we move into empathy and kindness. Raise your hand if you think you're a good person. Oh. I'm like, hold on. Okay, one more time, because now I'm concerned. Raise your hand if you think you're a good person. Okay, some people are unsure of themselves, which is incredibly concerning. You know, I ask this because I think a lot of times, because someone is a stranger, we assume the worst, right? It's like, you know, even Kate knows, like, I leave my bags places. Like, my friends are always like, Jessica, get your stuff. I'm like, I don't walk around assuming someone is gonna steal from me. It's just not at the top of my mind, because I'm like, well, I wouldn't steal. So why would I walk around assuming someone else would steal from me? No, of course, people steal, but I've not been robbed well, someone tried to steal my phone in Paris, but they did not win. But you know, I really say that to think about that. You know, if you think you're a good person, why are you assuming someone else is bad? And beyond that, I want you to also think about your everyday life. How often do you have a negative experience with another person? I know for me, it's pretty rare. You know, maybe bad customer service every once in a while, but it's very, very rare that I have a negative experience with someone. And even, in fact, right now, I can't think, in the last week, I can't think of a negative experience that I had with a person. And so, you know, I think that we have to stop walking around with this heaviness of like the fear of the stranger, because it's unfounded. Like, in your personal experience, it's probably unfounded. Of course, terrible things happen. I've had horrible things happen to me, both domestically and abroad. But I've never allowed those things to sort of deter me from my belief that most people are good. So I think that's really important to remember, just like human kindness. And I think right now we're living in a world, in a country that really wants us to hate each other. But those aren't our natural inclinations. You know what I mean? When you're walking down the street, I mean, some people, it is their natural inclination, but for the most part, it's not. So it's a very small amount of people that feel that way, but they have megaphones right now and will not shut up. But I really want to encourage you guys to think about your everyday life and what your everyday interactions are, and you'll realize so much of these differences that they're trying to exploit for capitalism don't really matter and don't really affect us. So again, one of the biggest lessons I learned traveling to every country in the world is that most people are good. And then we're more similar than we are different. You know, I think that we live in a world that benefits from hatred. But for me, I find so much beauty in the difference. Like, I don't want to go into a place and everyone looks like me and everyone thinks like me. Like, what am I going to learn there? You know, I love the fact that I have friends that are Muslim and Jewish and Christian and atheist and agnostic, because it makes for interesting conversation. In the same way that I love that I have friends from all sorts of backgrounds. When I look at my WhatsApp, I probably have conversations with people in like 50 countries on a fairly regular basis. I love that because I want to learn something every day. I don't need to only be in company with people who look like me and who think like me, because then your mind can be expanded. So, you know, we have tons of differences, but at the end of the day, we're all humans, and we all bleed the same. We all need food, clothing, and shelter. And more importantly, we all want love. Frank, you're gonna find me love, right? right? He probably can't hear me. And then the kindness of strangers, which is something you'll always hear me talk about. And really quickly, I'm going to tell a story from Nigeria. So when I was in Nigeria, I thought someone stole my phone. It turns out I dropped my phone in a parking lot and someone picked it up. And so we called the phone and the person isn't answering. We're like yelling into the phone. They're saying nothing. But we have Find My iPhone, so we're chasing the phone. And then they turn it off. And you're like, okay. So like 2 hours, like my Nigerian friends are like, girl, the phone is gone. And I'm like, no, it cannot be gone. And so they turn the phone back on and we chase it, we call, and he answers. He didn't speak English, which in Nigeria, most people speak English. And so finally we meet up with him, and when we see him, it's clear he has not showered or eaten in days. And so we go into this restaurant and we buy him a meal. He like eats it super fast. So we buy him another meal and tell him to take it with him. And then the naira, the currency, whatever I had, I just gave it all to him. And the reason he didn't answer the first time was he didn't know how to use the phone. He didn't have a phone. And again, it was like another situation where it's like, most people are good. And even though my friends were like, they live in Lagos, they're like, the phone is gone. I was like, no, I believe in the universe and the power of humans. And so this phone came back to me. And even though it caused me extreme anxiety, if I didn't drop my phone, that man might not have eaten that day. You know what I mean? Like if he may not have eaten the next day. And so, there's all these really beautiful moments that I think we don't think about how coincidence helps other people. And so my journey, I traveled to 89 countries solo. The only reason I was able to do that is because of the kindness of strangers. I could show up in South Sudan where like a friend of a friend from the U.S. Embassy was like, do not go there. This is not a game. Had an amazing time. So much fun. I was there solo. I went to Iran, did a road trip solo. I've been 89 countries solo, and a lot of them are these places where people are like, you can't go there. They're on the State Department's like list of, the red list, do not travel. That's all politically biased, by the way. And so it was really touching down in so many of these countries and putting my physical safety in the hands of strangers, and it worked out because here I am. Still in one piece. So the importance of confidence. And this is something that I've been talking about recently because a lot of people are like, well, aren't you scared? And I think for me, like all of the jobs that I've had and experiences that I've had to this point have given me a level of confidence which allows me to move through the world pretty freely. And I think part of it is, again, like I said before, no one on the planet has your same life experience. Because when we go out, everyone is judging us based on a number of factors, right? Like you guys see me, everyone is judging me based on different factors, based on how I'm dressed, based on my accent, based on my body type, based on so many things, because we all have these data sets and everyone we meet, we run them through a data set essentially. And so you have to understand, even an identical twin will never have the same life experience. And then also you're interacting with other humans. There's so much wisdom in that. And I think we can't forget that. So no matter how old you are or how young you are, you have so much to offer to the world. And I don't want people to think, oh, if you don't have a certain educational experience or if you're not where you want to be financially, you still have your own lived experiences, and there's so much wisdom in that, and that should help bolster your confidence. Focus on a passion and become an expert, because expertise helps to bolster your confidence. I'm an expert in geography and a few other things. And, so sometimes I find myself in rooms with people trying to question me, and I'm just like, I don't even really acknowledge it because I know what I know. And even if someone is trying to prove that I don't know something, I'm like, I know what I know, so I'm not going to play those games. So I think it's really important to find that passion and know your thing so that when you go out and people try to test you, you're like, no, I know what I know. That's really important. Hone your personal style. And I don't say this only because I love fashion, but because it's important. And it doesn't have to be anything in particular. When I was at Pfizer, one thing my manager taught me was, because, we used to go into offices, doctors' offices, and, they want you to look good. And the one thing they taught us was that people judge you from the first 12 feet, 12 inches, and the first 12 words that come out of your mouth. And again, we got all this data. We're running you through the data set. It matters, Now, whatever your personal style is, again, it's fine. I have a friend who wears all black. I'm like, could never be me, but that's his style, And I think it's important because also it makes you memorable. If you have the same vibe every time people see you, it's going to make you memorable. I meet a lot of people, and some people I forget, and they get very upset with me when I see them again, and I'm like, but you're not memorable. I'm sorry. But my friend who always wears black, everyone remembers him because he always wears black, The internet. Be inspired, but don't copy. Look at all these girls who try to be Kim Kardashian. And now Kim Kardashian and all the clan, they're taking out all their stuff, all their lips and cheeks and butts. And now look at all these people who changed their bodies to be them. Now what are you going to do? I think it's really important to find inspiration in a variety of ways, but it has to be you, and it has to be yours. So everything you do, you can be influenced, but don't try to be somebody else because you're going to get burned out. And consistency is key. So over time, why have I been able to continue doing what I'm doing? Because I always did it my way. And maybe there were a lot of no's in the beginning, but I stayed firm in who I was, and now there's a lot more yeses, and now I'm giving more no's. Social media is not real life. I would like everyone to remember, social media is not real life. I have a lot of friends who are influencers. I have a lot of friends who are celebrities. Trust me, the internet is smoke and mirrors. Unfollow people who make you feel bad about yourself. I do it, just because I don't want to feel bad about myself. And you have to pay attention to that stuff. But you cannot compare your life to people on social media because it's not real. Because a lot of your favorite influencers are hermits. They put on clothes to go take a picture and they go back in their house and they never go out. I know a lot of them. It's weird. It's so fascinating that so many of them are hermits. It's one of the most interesting things I found living in LA. Social media is not real. Please do not forget that. How do you create the life that you want to live? I'm wrapping up soon because I feel like I've gone way over time. Okay, this is me in Antigua. Very beautiful beaches. Find your frequency. So that book, Keys to Success and Happiness by Susie Pearl, changed my life. And a big part of it was like this idea of like your frequency and like vibrations and energy and all that. And so it's like fine tuning. And so I feel like when you really figure out who you are and you're, some of you don't know what a radio is probably. This motion is the tuning of a radio. A lot of people have no idea what I'm talking about. But we used to, that was how we changed the radio station until you got the clear sound. And so that's sort of what it's like when you're finding your frequency. And when you find that frequency, you find other people who are on that same frequency. I meet a lot of people now, and it feels like we've known each other forever in the first 5 minutes because we're all on that same frequency. Like I said before, consistency is key. This was me in Colombia, in Cali. Consistency is key. So again, be yourself. It's the only way that you're going to be consistent in anything you do, no matter what your career is. It's literally the only way that you're going to find success, because when you're being wishy-washy, people can tell. When you're not being genuine, people can tell. So just be consistent and be yourself. This is for the young people. Go work for someone else. Do not start your entrepreneurial journey at 20, please. I'm begging you. I have to hire people often, and I'm tired of the 25-year-old who's running their own business and has never worked for anyone, and they got all these boundaries. No. You really have to go work for someone else. I, in particular, think you should go and work for a company. Personally, I think it's important to work at a company. Get that corporate experience. But stop thinking that you need to start your own business and go on your entrepreneurial journey. You have so much more to learn, because people will look at me and say, well, you did it. Yeah, in my 30s. I worked for a lot of people before I got here. That, to me, is like one of the key things for this generation. Please, I'm begging you, go work for someone else before you start your own thing. Or while you're doing your own thing, get a full-time job working for someone else. Please, you have a lot to learn. Life is not a straight path, which you saw. This is me in Kyrgyzstan. Don't be afraid of no. So I recently, this is like the day after I interviewed the vice president, I woke up and I was thinking about how all of my no's led me to where I am today. I think we think a lot about the yeses. But for me, I think about all of the no's, in particular in the last year. But when I think about the last 5 years of my journey, I said no to a lot of things, which were hard. I said no to some a lot of six-figure deals, which I still think about, I won't lie. But there's a lot that I said no to. If I would have said yes, it would have blocked me from doing so many of the things that I'm doing now that are much bigger and better. And so even, when one door closes, another one opens, it's true. And I think there's more power in saying no than saying yes. When the vice president's team asked me to do something on April 3rd, they were probably taken aback when I said no, but it was my friend's mom's birthday. Her dad died in December, and so we all said we were gonna go with her to Panama to celebrate her birthday. I was unwilling to give up on that commitment to my friend. Now, of course, when I got to Panama, her mom was like, "Are you insane? You could have came to Brooklyn to see me." And I'm like, "No, I told you I would be here." I mean, I was super tired and I would have rather been in LA, but I was like, I made the commitment to you. And I believe what is for me is for me. I assumed they would find someone else to host the conversation, but then a few days later, they're like, "Okay, can you do April 5th?" Because they wanted me to do it. And so, yeah, I could have changed all of my plans and left my friend's mom hanging, but I said no, and it still happened, and it happened kind of on my terms, which was great. So don't be afraid of saying no, and don't be afraid of receiving the word no. And then the last thing is define for yourself what success is. I grew up immigrant parents, so success was 2 degrees, luxury car, husband, 2 kids, no dog. We're not a dog family. House, picket fence, maybe vacation home, traveling. That was the idea I grew up with. You could not have told me that I would not be in the C-suite of a Fortune 500 company right now. That is just where I knew I was going. That day in that car, when I got that 3-digit bonus, I was like, all right, I have to reevaluate. So what does success look like for me? For me, success is having enough money to do the things that I want to do and having the freedom of my time to be able to spend time with my friends and family at any given point, to be able to travel to see my friends for birthdays and whatever it is. So I think for you, you have to just, you have to define what success is for you versus basing it on what society says. And that is it. I'm sorry, I feel like I spoke for a really long time. I hope we still have time for Q&A. I'm sorry I ran over. But here's Kate with a microphone if anybody has questions.
If you have a question, just raise your hand, but please wait for the mic to ask it.
May I ask you, what was your most
We love Frank.
May I ask you, what was your most dangerous trip and what happened?
Oh, that's a really good question. So my most dangerous trip was a trip to Miami. And I go to Miami often, but this particular trip, I was staying at a friend's house near South Beach. And turns out we locked the key in the house. Did not realize it when we came back from the beach. So we had a locksmith who was trying to open the door. And it was loud. It was definitely loud. But we were in beachwear. And one of my friend's neighbors came out and we're like, sorry for the noise. He's a locksmith. Lock the key in, Another came out, said the same thing. Next, me and my friend, we're just sitting talking to each other. Next thing I know, I see police coming in. I think nothing of it. So I see them. I turn back to my friend. Next thing I know, I'm hearing yelling. I turn back and there's a gun in my face. And I'm like, he's a locksmith, he's a locksmith. And they're like, we got a call that someone's breaking in. I'm like, no, he's a locksmith. This is my friend's house. We're staying here, da-da-da-da-da. I'm just speaking as fast as possible. And we're all just like, me, my friend, and the locksmith, we're like, ah. And finally we were able to calm him down. And they're like, we need to see IDs. So the locksmith, they're speaking to him in Spanish. And he's like, I don't speak Spanish. And they're speaking to him, and they keep speaking to him in Spanish. He's like, no habla español. And he's like, I'm Israeli. Like, I don't speak Spanish. And it was just such a horribly scary experience. I didn't grow up with gun culture. I've never seen a gun. So the first time I'm seeing a gun, it's point blank range in my face. And that was the worst thing that has ever happened to me traveling. So shout out to America.
This was incredibly interesting. Thank you very much. How about something really important? Favorite food?
Why do y'all do this? Everyone wants favorites. I'm like, there's so many amazing things in the world. I'm working on a cookbook with 50 of my favorite countries from around the world. 50 of my favorite recipes from 50 countries. Senegal, Japan, Italy, Trinidad, I think has amazing street food that is slept on. Okay, I'm gonna go with those. I feel like I'm missing something probably, but okay. Yes.
Thank you for your very insightful speech. So I wonder how you sort of get the finance thing of traveling, like, I don't know, money or like related, any supports or financial support.
Yeah. Good question. People always ask me that. Number one, I always live below my means. So no matter how much money I'm making, I always live below my means. People will probably look at me now and think certain things. I live severely under my means. And the reason I do that is because I really like my freedom. So what does that mean? I like to be able to quit my jobs. So I'm a really good saver, and I've been a very good investor until the Ukrainian war, which just lost a lot of money. It's okay, it's gonna come back. But yeah, like I always save. And so typically when I'm traveling, I was working. So like I was living in Rome, I was working full time. So I was traveling during that time, but I was working. And then when I left, like I was getting consulting gigs. So I was consulting for the UNIAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, working as an editor. So I've always just used whatever skills I have to find work, typically based on previous work that I've done. And I think one thing I didn't say is like, I have a real commitment to excellence. So no matter what I'm doing, even if I hate it, I try to do it really well so that if I do quit and I need to go back, the reason I could quit the UN like 3 times and keep going back is because I was really great when I worked there. So I would save money, quit, go back, like, do y'all need me again? So yeah, I always found ways to just work remotely when I was traveling.
Ooh, wow, I didn't mean to be that loud. You're really fascinating. I like that you touched on street food. So as you've traveled to these different countries, what have you done so that so that your system could acclimate, so that you could enjoy the street foods in these various places? Is there anything, are there any secrets you have on acclimating?
My stomach is coated in positive energy. I've never had food poisoning ever in my life. I also don't ever think about it. So I was in Pakistan. I've like gotten diarrhea here and there. But I was in Pakistan and I was with some Pakistani guys and we were walking through Old Town in Lahore and I saw, people in line for this food. I was like, oh, I want to try some roti, some chickpeas. They were like, oh, you can't eat that. I was like, why? People are in line. They're like, you cannot eat that. We don't eat that. I was like, I'm going to eat it. And eat it I did, and I was fine, and they couldn't even believe it. But again, I don't assume someone's gonna steal from me. I don't assume because it's on the street I'm gonna get sick. Like, I'm not even so picky about water. You know, like some people will go places and they won't brush their teeth with the water. I'm like, whatever, this little parasite won't kill me. And so I think because of that, I've just built up my system over time. Because I see just last week, a friend was in Joburg and she got food poisoning. I'm like, that's so crazy. Like, food doesn't make me sick. But it's because I'm not thinking about it. So I joke and say it's coded in positive energy, but I really do believe in the law of attraction. If you're like, do you guys remember the Sex and the City movie? In Charlotte, and they were in Mexico, and Charlotte was like, oh, I'm only gonna eat things that are in packages, and then she got a little bit of water on her tongue and got super sick because she drew that to her. So I really believe in the law of attraction, and I just don't think about those things. When I travel, I'm not thinking, am I gonna get sick if I eat this food? I'm like, ooh, that looks good. I wanna eat it. I don't eat bugs. Then I don't think people are gonna steal from me. I've not had anything stolen. I don't think about my blackness. I don't go and think, oh, how am I going to be received in this place as a black person? I literally don't think about that. And it's funny because I was in rural Kyrgyzstan and I was walking across the street going to get a SIM card and traffic was stopping and people were staring at me and I was like, oh, yeah, I'm black. And they've definitely never seen a black person here. But I don't think about it in advance. And so I think because I try to go into things with a really open mind and open stomach, that sort of has helped me along the way. Mm-hmm.
Hi, I was wondering, when you solo travel, do you have any safety tips or how you make connections with the people there, and how you just make the most of your trip?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do not think about my personal safety very often, if I'm being honest. I think for me, typically when I solo travel, I stay at hotels just because I like having the concierge, and if I'm being lazy, I don't want to go out for food, I can get room service, etc. I think if you're on a budget, hostels are great. And it's also great to stay at hostels because you meet other people who are traveling. And so I haven't stayed at a lot of hostels, but the times that I have, I've met other people, and then, you have a built-in friend. You have people to go out with, have dinner with. So I think hostels are great. But I think, in particular as women, we have intuition. So, if I meet someone and I'm like, ooh, vibe is off, I trust that. I'm not like, oh, am I crazy? I'm like, nope, vibe is off, leaving this place, or you know what I mean? So I really try to trust that. And again, the world is mostly safe. I think the patriarchy wants women to believe oh my God, if you leave your home without a man, something terrible is gonna happen to you. It is really not that true. Of course, horrible things happen. But when you think about assault, right? Most women are assaulted by people they know. It's not often strangers. So I think that we overemphasize the need to focus on our safety. Most women who travel solo haven't had something bad happen to them. Otherwise, there wouldn't be that many women traveling solo. So I think the first thing is, don't think so much about it. Because again, law of attraction, then you're drawing it to you. And then when something bad happens, you're like, I knew it. Well, you asked for it. So I really think, I know this sounds crazy, but I really do think that you have to go into situations positively, trust your intuition. Another thing that I do, which is more my preference than anything, when I land in a place, I know where I'm sleeping, and I usually have a driver at the airport. Especially if it's far, I don't want to get off of a plane after 14 hours and I'm trying to figure out a public transportation system. I'm trying to figure out how to take the train and I'm delirious. Even coming here yesterday, it was 10 hours of travel from LA. I get to the front desk. I'm like, where's my wallet? I left my wallet in the car and my sunglasses because I was kind of delirious. You know what I mean? And so it's to me, those are two things that I always have in place just to ensure I know where I'm sleeping and I'm getting there without having to question, especially if you're in a country you don't know the language. It can just be taxing. So those are some of my tips.
Hi, I'm Zoe. I'm a graduating senior. I'm 23, and I'm about to go solo traveling this summer in Australia. And
Amazing. So far.
yeah, it's so far. So I'm going for a long time, but I'm so grateful for you for coming today. And this is just a phenomenal, like to hear your wisdom.
Thank you.
On similar lines, how do you think about when traveling, to Australia so far away, or similarly, planning the trip in advance versus letting the trip flow naturally, like booking airfare from different destinations or letting the ability to be spontaneous dictate what you'd like to be doing?
Yeah, so I definitely try to keep space for spontaneity. So if I'm doing a long trip, let's say like 3 weeks or something, I'll just book the first 3 days. So again, Australia, it's like going to take you 80 hours to get there. But you get there, you know where you're sleeping at least for 3 days. If you're not used to jet lag, it'll take you 3 days to adjust to that jet lag. So you have a landing place, but then, leave it open. For me, I'm like, I get in taxis. I'm like, what should I see in your country? Or you meet other people. I talk to people at hotels, or I talk to a waiter or a bartender, and they tell me someplace else to go. I remember when me and my friend were in, where were we? Myanmar. And we heard about this place. What was it? Kuta something. It wasn't on anything that we'd seen, but we trusted the guy. And it took us like 4 hours out of our way, but it was absolutely amazing. And like, if we had a set schedule, then we wouldn't have been able to do it. And even on that trip, we were sort of just booking hotels day by day and booking flights day by day. So I think if you have a really long trip, just leave a lot open to spontaneity and just discovery. So definitely book something for those first 2 days because you will be delirious. But then just see what life throws at you. Mm-hmm. It's a very expensive place to solo travel, by the way. Go to Indonesia. It's way cheaper.
How many languages do you know, and how important
Oh,
is
sorry.
it? Oh, sorry. How many languages do you know, and how important is it to know the local language?
Ooh. So I speak pretty good French. I used to speak Japanese. I don't anymore. My Italian is good, so that helps me with my Spanish and Portuguese. How important is it? English is a pretty solid language to have. Every country in the world, you're going to find people who speak English. And if you can't, look for about someone who's between 10 and 15, they are learning English in school. So find the young people, they definitely speak English, and they're watching American TV. How important is the language? I think most places most people go, you're fine with English. For me, like traveling through Francophone, Central Africa and West Africa, it was very difficult to find people to speak English. Like I did, but not people I was interacting with regularly. So and I was doing it solo. So my brain was really getting some exercise. But yeah, I would say for the most part, if you're in major cities in any country, people speak English.
I want to thank you so much for sharing all of your experiences because my very long list of countries I want to visit has now gotten even longer.
Get the book. It'll get longer.
Oh, no, that's what I'm saying. I've read the book, so it is much longer.
Okay.
So thank you. I'm curious, though, as to whether or not you would take on the challenge today of trying to visit the 195 countries, and if you would take it on, knowing what you know today, would you do it differently?
Would I do it? Yeah, because I'm curious, but I would do a lot differently. So when I decided I was going to give myself a time deadline, I'd already been to 60 countries on 6 continents. So I was playing a game of pickup, which sucks because, I remember I did the South Pacific in 2 different trips. The South Pacific is really far away. Forget about Australia. The South Pacific is even further, So, I remember going to Samoa. That was like literally a 36-hour trip one way to get to Samoa. And when I did the northern part, it was just really physically exhausting. So like in 2019, I flew 250,000 miles, 170 flights. It stopped being interesting. Like it didn't stop being interesting, but I was physically exhausted, I was much younger, so flying in middle seats for 20 hours didn't bother me. But yeah, if I started it today from zero, I would go continent by continent and like stay there until I finished, and then move on to the next one. That would be the biggest thing that I would change, but I would still do it. Obviously, the world is so different now, and I mean, I wish I could have done it in like the 70s when there was less globalization, right? Like, there's so few countries in the world where like the stuff in markets aren't made in China, So I wish. Yeah, I wish there was less globalization. Bhutan is like one of few countries that have managed to really, really maintain their culture, but it's a tiny kingdom in the Himalayan mountains.
Much about the world. Just for example, I'm 50 years old, and I'm embarrassed to say that when I was in high school and when I graduated from William and Mary, I didn't know as much about colonialism as I learned from your book. And what's so great also is just your enthusiasm and your compassion and your empathy for people. It just comes through in your book. But my question for you is, I know that you like shopping at markets and you like to get fabrics from places where you've traveled, so I was hoping you would tell us about your outfit today.
Oh, yeah. I was telling Kate about this. So this is a brand called Tangoro. It's based in Senegal, and I was a fan of the brand for a long time, and Dakar is a place that I frequent. I go at least once a year. I'm buying a place there. And so the founder, Sarah, has become one of my closest friends. We were actually on the phone when I was coming out. And so this was part of her collection, but she makes like a ton of custom clothes for me. So when I went to the state dinner in Ghana, she made me a custom dress. So it's a beautiful friendship. And also she makes clothes for Beyonce. So, so basically I'm Beyonce. No.
We got about time for one more question. Anyone want to ask the last question? A lot of pressure, I know.
Of course.
I was curious, as you're traveling, as an American, when you go to these different countries, has the impression of America changed? Have you noticed how you're received is any different over the years? Has it been kind of consistent, or?
Well, the really interesting thing is that people never think I'm American. So even when people hear my voice, they think that I'm an African that studied in the U.S. So I don't know, because I'm not treated as an American. So oftentimes, like when I'm in Europe, people speak to me in French. Even if I'm not in France, people assume I'm Francophone, African. But oftentimes when I use my U.S. passport, they think it's fake. Or when I use my Ugandan passport, they think I'm trying to overstay a visa. So I actually don't really know. So, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much. This has been great.